Dzień dobry Państwu. Bardzo dziękujemy za liczną obecność mimo późnej pory już. Wieś nie tylko rolnicza, społeczne inicjatywy szansą na wieś zrównoważoną i atrakcyjną.
Village not only agricultural but sustainable and with opportunities for life. And we will be introducing all panelists. We have a vast panel with 6 participants. We also have a guest from the New Zealand. All the proceedings will be in Polish. If somebody needs translation for the input by our guest, please take the headsets just outside this room. You can collect the headsets for translation. My name is Monika Szewczyk-Wittek. I represent Polish by nature and have the pleasure to chair the meeting, to moderate the meeting. And in this very pleasant room with us, there are, I will read names of our guests without any mistake, I hope. Andrzej, Hałasiewicz, expert for supporting development of rural areas, chairman of the Council of Foundation for Development of Polish Agriculture. Monika, Stanny, Director of Institute of Development of Rural Areas from Polish Academy of Science. Agnieszka Wącławska, local leader, member of Circle of Housewives in Village, and Grażyna Jałgos-Dębska, Deputy President of National Association of Village Leaders, and Małgorzata Bojańczyk, Director of Polish Association of Sustainable Development, and Mr. Hamish Marr, Special Envoy from New Zealand for trading with agricultural products. And before we move on to a round of questions, there will be 3 rounds. I would like to ask you who in the audience lives in rural areas. Well, hands up. And who lives in a village which is distant from a large conurbation by 40-50 kilometers? This is good information for us because it also shows who in our audience is here. We will be able to refer to this information. I wanted to ask you to draw me a picture of a village today in 2025 from the perspective of demographics and succession, but also a picture which you see with information that village is not uniform because it differs depending on its location. Close to large conurbation, the village has different problems, and a village far away from large conurbation have different problems. So let me ask Professor Monika Stanny, who has fresh data and will be able to outline this situation for us. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, if we consider whether rural areas are agricultural today or not, we should say it depends. So legal way answering, it depends. So the best measure is data from the agricultural register. And it is breaking down into agricultural and non-agricultural people. So people with arable lands and without. So agricultural are not people who are users. It's a farm, a household with a farm. Not only they have land, but also in over 50% they live on this land. And if entering the EU, 52% of inhabitants of rural areas in Poland were people who not only lived in households with usability of farm, but they also lived on the farm. So now this percentage is 22% in Poland, and 78% inhabitants of rural areas are people without agricultural connections. So this is the first answer, whether we have an agricultural village or not. But this is the process of desaggregarization. So briefly about the 3 processes which will best define this. So this process of desaggregarization, it's changing the sources of source of living from agricultural to non-agricultural. This is a natural, obvious process happening everywhere, and this is not any disaster. Even necessary it is. However, this disaggregation process is developing with various intensity in various areas. It's different close to conurbations and different far away from towns. So far away, generally we used to say that town is in opposition to the village and village is in opposition to town. Today we are talking first of all about a village nearby the conurbations. In such a village, a process of gentrification happens, so maybe urbanizing, the towns spreading, and people who live near the towns are gaining the features of standard way of living and running their households very similar to that in towns. And later, finally, we have this process of peripherizing. So those areas, it is roughly 2/3 of rural municipalities in Poland. On the peripheries, 1/3 is concentrating in the village. There is getting urbanized, let's say, but where peripherizing happens, unfortunately, the greater share of agricultural function in local management, the lower multifunction of the municipality, then the peripherization is greater. So only where we will have, apart from agriculture, other agricultural functions which will allow us to keep young people there, which will allow us to provide public services for those people, we will hold people there. But practically both the process of depopulation, and secondly, process of disaggregation, and thirdly, process of urbanizing. These are all three processes which will be progressing, and we today have to learn to mitigate certain things, to get resistant to them, and cope with them. However, unfortunately, we will not stop them. Thank you. Yes, I'm handing over the floor, and thank you for not only the picture, but for mapping the problems which are already noticeable in studies. And I ask for the very same thing next speakers, not only to show the picture, but also to highlight the areas where it is worthwhile to strengthen the social activities and to launch that. So about what Monika said, I would add one more question, which is more visible globally. Worldwide, we can read it in the recent FAO, the status of women in agri-food systems from 2023, that a noticeable trend globally is that there are most places for men and women are in countries with a low income, and especially in breeding animals, fishery and agriculture, which is the main driving force to reduce poverty. But following development, economic development, the percentage of women and men in agricultural and food sector is dropping. So is it really so? Maybe Monika could tell us a word about this, whether this economic development is actually acting against farmers. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, and it is the case for years now, but now it is speeding up because we have a completely different technological progress, and it is so-called technological unemployment which is being created. So technology is pushing out the population involved in agriculture. So lamenting that soon we will run short of people in agriculture is not quite fully grounded. Let me add the rest of information, but not here. So, yes, exactly. This was the point. Dealing with supporting development of rural areas, we tended to think how to create forces which are not pushing people out from agriculture, but to create sucking forces, how to create jobs outside agriculture so that people have where to go out, and even for them to want to go out to those places. So what Monika mentioned, we are successful. So people living in a village have a different, stable kind of source of income. I would like to put it very clearly and out loud. Ladies and gentlemen, Polish village, not only Polish village, but people living in Poland, or people who live in these territories, have never lived that well as now. We have to be aware of that, and it's worth reminding that we actually have great success. Many people live well. Yes, there are poverty areas, there are problems, but it is very good.
To ktoś, kto jechał tu do Jasionka.
The fact that rural areas are well off, well, driving here to Jasionka, you could see how beautiful are our villages, how they changed. This is an extremely important element. But to the picture which was outlined by Professor Stanny, let me add something like this. I have a problem to see what the village is like. And the problem results from the fact that our statistics is not coping with measuring phenomena occurring in rural areas. Actually, we don't know how many farmers we have. We don't know. We don't know because there are many people who pretend to be farmers and actually they work in big cities in Poland, for example, in construction or other sectors, or they go back and forth working abroad, but they are statistically treated as farmers. We don't know how many farms we have, not 1.2 million, but I guess really we have 120,000 farms. Well, again, as a measure, let us take it. But even in Wielkopolski region, in extremely agricultural area where we carried out very simple studies in 11 municipalities, we asked municipality offices how much tax they get from agricultural activities, and asked leaders how many true farmers are there. So in extremely rural Wielkopolski region with large farms, it is also about 20% active farms. In other parts of the country, it is much worse. So really, we don't know what the village looks like. We know very little. And we have to keep in mind that today's village is something completely different from classic imagination. In the past, village was a common living place, a cultural community. Today, in a village, people live who may have their circles in various places, not only outside the village, but globally, via Zoom or other means. They can be talking to another end of the world, for example, New Zealand, but there is the community of experience. I was born and brought up in a village, and in my experience, it was actually after harvest work for a month. We were working in our farm, then helping other farmers in their farms, working together, talking together. Since the big machines became common, you do not have this phenomenon. So village is completely different. And actually, as I wrote in one of articles, those villages do not exist, I guess. Well, the village, traditional village is, well, there is a place where people live involved in various activities, but if we look at a village from the perspective of utilizing farmland, well, because land is aral, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be time for questions, so please write down the questions. Please let everybody finish the first round. Everybody want to get the microphone, but I would let you end the input, but this time Małgorzata. Okay, thank you very much. So I would now, from the perspective of women, because today I represent an organization supporting women in rural areas, of course also in agriculture, and we heard about outflow of people from there. It is not about young people, but also about women who migrate to towns looking for better circumstances for professional development. And here, as Agra Women Foundation, Association, together with Polish Academy of Science, with Monika Stanny and her team, we carried out studies about women in agriculture, and there are themes showing up which actually show what is happening in rural areas. And here the result was that women are often better educated than men, and therefore these professional opportunities are limited. This is one of the reasons for migration. And other part is what was mentioned here is a question of diversification of economic activities. In our study, 36% women working in agriculture combines work with in agriculture with other activities, which actually points at the necessity to look for other sources of income. So we may say that village becomes a space for entrepreneurship, where there are services, agrotourism, and craftsmanship or local production of food. And in Poland, although women manage 38% of aral land, more than in EU average, only 16% of them identify themselves as managers of a farm. This may mean that formally they play the role of owners, but they have the influence on making economic decisions. What is needed here is a question of local initiatives. I know we will be discussing it later. A question of taking some action which will keep those women in place and will make it more attractive for them to perceive the village not only from agricultural perspective, but what else can be done to be able to stay there, to keep this succession, because it is a problem not only of Poland, but of the whole EU. We have information that in Germany only 18% farms go to the next generation, so this problem affects many countries. Thank you for the questions. I think they will be available in some time. We will have an opportunity to pass. Yes, I wanted also to pump up the question of variety in village. Well, in former panel, we heard that villages vary. You also mentioned that, but I wanted to mention something still different. In my opinion, history made a loop. Just like after the war, people were escaping from the village because the village was considered something worse. I mean, illiteracy, worse standard of living. What was better was in town. Now, for I think 20, 30 years, the situation is that people escape from towns going to the village, but they go to the village. Well, I am an example of this kind. I have been living for 20 years in a village. Is it an agricultural village? I would like to separate the topic. I know we are at a European agricultural forum, but let's remember that village is not a rural area. It's not only farming. Not every farmer is the local leader, and vice versa, and in areas close to towns. Well, I live in a bubble, so I am surrounded, living in rural area close to town, and although I am paying the agricultural tax because I have appropriate land, but I was never a farmer, and in my village I don't know if there is one horse used in the past for working in the farm. I am not counting the riding horses. There are a couple dozen horses, but it is a completely different goal, not agricultural use. So the community in rural areas is changing. So the village close to town, it's a completely different world. And village on the western wall of Poland, also including Mazurian lake area, it's completely different. And on eastern wall, villages look completely different. You can see in many aspects of life, in preferences, our political choices, we can see this map of Poland, how it is perceived in various, elections, choices in the forms of area of our existence. So also let us remember, when talking about rural areas, it is the only panel which talks about rural areas, but not in agricultural perspective. So I'm glad that this social aspect found its place. I hope I will be able to talk about about local government in rural areas, because here we also have interesting studies. Maybe I can tell you a little bit more about women. More and more women are local leaders, and now we have two regions in Poland, West Pomeranian and Lower Silesian, where there are more women than village heads. In May, National Statistical Office will publish results from 2024. It's a year of elections in those municipalities which were shifted to five-year term and were women being village heads, so like a herd leader, a manager, a person managing that local community. Will be more such women. It is the first level of territorial government, but as you know, the village head is an auxiliary position, so lower level of local government, and it is the first stage where women started taking over the lead, and I hope that in further higher levels there will be more of us after this local governmental elections and parliament. Out of 80 members in municipalities, there are only 2 women. So I don't have knowledge about agricultural issues. I'm not moving about that area, but social questions, local governmental, by all means. And here we are in the lead. And this agricultural leg has to be strengthened. I would like to have such money at my institute to carry out studies why those women are more among village heads, because there is opinion that it is not related with women's power, but with less interest in men to be village head. Therefore, space appeared for women. But yes, intentionally I'm provoking you, because these are very interesting and important social questions, because they are changing the village, but unfortunately scientific policy does not take into account such aspects in funding. About questions of choice, maybe at some different occasion, but I would like to land. I know the village, Żarnowica, where Agnieszka lives. It's a village which actually resembles my childhood. It resembles the village of my father, and a very good place, warm place, which actually takes care of you. It is a social aspect which I sensed very well. Agnieszka, tell us about the village you know. Agnieszka is the member of circle of housewives. Yes, you feel this community, but during my life, about 30 years, I noticed that the village is changing. So, yes, I actually tend to believe that the village is changing. And to put it in, I live in a very small village, about 160 inhabitants. It is a village in Małopolskie region, and it is about 40 kilometers away from Krakow. So it is... So, for sure, each of us lives in a different place, especially that this is a forum grouping people from all over Poland. And from my perspective, the village looks like this. Our farms are small because these are farms from 5 to 10 hectares each. And if somebody has 15 hectares, in our opinion, that person is a big farmer. The farms are rich and we can produce a lot. Yes, we can survive on it, let me put it like this. But I noticed such a trend that as my parents or my grandparents were able to survive of farming only, and they were not taking up any job. Now the younger generation, my generation, middle-aged, now, actually, fingers of one hand would mean people living only, solely of farming, and most people take the great effort to maintain the land, to farm it, but they work 8 hours a day on a job. After work, they come back to the fields and they do all necessary work. in the farm, or possibly, if they are too tired, they actually rent their farm to somebody, because there is also the strong feeling that you have to keep father's land to keep it aral. So I would put it like this, but I notice this trend that now very few people have small gardens next to their homes, which earlier it was unthinkable for somebody not to have a garden to feed them, to live on it. Very few people have some poultry, some chicken for eggs or meat afterwards. And yes, in the village we have exactly one horse, which is now more used for a hobby, not to work on the farm. And yes, cows can be counted on the fingers of one hand. So the village is really changing, and now we have situations that the whole village can have a monoculture, for example, rape or wheat only. And like I remember when my parents worked in the field, they always took all children with them, and we were going from one farmer to another, working together. Now it does not exist, and there are no border lines between farms, but we are losing great amount of plants and trees, this biodiversity, which 30 years ago it was unthinkable not to have them. Agnieszka, thank you very much for this. So the name of the village is Żarnowica. So I would include our guest from New Zealand into our conversation. Before our meeting, I had an opportunity exchanging a few words, and very soon we came to the conclusion that problems are very similar. Well, actually, you had an opportunity to listen us talking of Polish village, and let me ask what it looks like in New Zealand. Is it really so that village all over the world struggles with the same problems?
It's exactly right. Everywhere around the world, this problem exists, and it exists because in real time, the value of our food has decreased compared to the value of the land around it, and we've got very, very good at producing land to the point where the money that we make off our farms is not good enough to sustain us anymore, and food has got so cheap. So no one has a vegetable garden in New Zealand either, because it's cheaper to buy the food at the supermarket. You go to anywhere in the EU, you go to anywhere in North America, Australia, New Zealand, this problem is identical. When my grandfather and my great-grandfather were farmers, they employed 20 people. On our farm today, we employ 2 on the same area of land. And I would think it would be the same thing in Poland. Agriculture has got very, very mechanical, so we don't need the labour involved in farming to the degree that we did even 20 years ago. And that is only, I'm not going to say improving, but that is how it is. Our village, where I live, we have, it's bigger than your village, there's 1,500 people there. But the crucial thing for me in a village is that everything is integrated. A school and a shop, all of those social things that make the fabric of a community. When a village loses its school, for example, it loses all the parents coming to pick up the children. It loses all the sport that the children play. And then when the people aren't coming to pick up their children, they're not going to the shop. And when they're not going to the shop, they're not buying the product. And this is not a problem, I don't think, that is unique in Poland by any stretch. I heard a podcast just last week outlining that in the United States now you need more than 700 hectares to not have to go and get a job off your farm. So you need to be a big farmer in order to sustain the costs involved in agriculture. In terms of the questions of diversity and involving everyone in agriculture, look, I couldn't agree more. I think you're 100% right. I tell everyone that I know, every young person, to go and do a qualification in agriculture for the simple reason that everyone needs to eat 3 times a day. So if you have a qualification in agriculture, you will always have a job because agriculture will always exist. You don't need to be a farmer to be involved in agriculture. We need scientists, we need truck drivers, we need agronomists, we need people to do testing. We need all of those things that are in the supply chain, and they can be anyone. In my farm, my wife and my brother and his wife and their children, all of our children, my mother and my father are all still involved. To me, the essence of farming around the world is the family. It is the most important thing because it's the families that sustain the villages. So village life to me is all about the family, and then the families, not all about the farming families, but the families in general are what make a village. The farming families that are around the village are important, but they're no more important than any of the others, because in one way or another, everyone has a link to farming somewhere.
Bardzo dziękujemy.
Thank you very much for this additional context. It's hard not to agree. We all nodded our heads when you were speaking, and I would move on to the second round. And I remember about questions from the audience. I will come up in a moment to you, but I wanted to ask from bottom-up initiatives. So not these initiatives which are happening in rural areas and being inspired from above, but how to support the social capital of the village, which exists and which is very strong. Grażyna, I would ask you, because you started talking about village heads. So last week a new association of village heads of Lower Silesia, and female and males. So it's not a coincidence. What to do to strengthen the social capital? In my opinion, it is related to local government very strongly, especially regarding auxiliary units or village leaders, village heads. So the local government, that means municipality rulers, open for cooperation, open for participation, for building social capital of the civic society. I know that what I will say may be not popular among local government people. Definitely 2 terms support the fact for the openness.
Nie ma nic gorszego w samorządzie.
For building civic society, there is nothing worse in local community as rulers leading the municipalities for 20-30 years, actually holding their positions, being main payers in the municipality, main employers, not payers, employers. Yes, because they hire clerks, they give jobs for organizational units, so all schools and so forth. And there is nothing worse than rulers actually rooted so strongly that they do not see partners in the society. They do not give space for leaders. This is related not only to rural areas, not only to village heads, but it is also related to cities, local governments in the cities. If there is no openness for participation, for co-deciding, because this is also related to city dwellers. This is the main obstacle for me. And give space, and we will make use of this space. So let me add to this. Professor Buzek yesterday said that a village is a place where you would like to live well. So I will actually pump up the question on how to do it and how to utilize the social capital and bottom-up movement, how to help.
Współpraca.
Well, cooperation, this is basis of all existence. So actually, especially in the village, it is necessary because in the village, distant is always, everything is far away. Communication is very important. And another thing, what my neighbor said, school, local integrator, school, we neglect it a little bit. In Poland, unfortunately, it happens that very often schools are liquidated. And these are economic questions. There is no tax base in poor peripheral municipalities. Grażyna, I was looking where those village heads who hold the position for 20, 30 years. They are mainly in peripheral municipalities, so they are somewhere far away in eastern Poland. There is no human capital which can introduce a change in local communities. So it is like, please keep this perspective. You have it from the position of the variety, where there is a big concentration of people. It's a big choice because your village is near a big town. Yeah, well, I will not fully agree because now we are. Until the 31st of March, municipal council make a decision whether the village funds will be made available, and we carry out advisory within the villagehead.org.pl, and we are phoned not only by village leaders from my village type, but the leaders exist, and so far they are in minority. They cannot break through, so the social capital exists, but it is too small. But it is the starting point for causing a change. I know that, well, how to have, concrete is more difficult to break because a drop will break through a rock, but with concrete it goes longer. So a few words of a comment. Ladies said, yes, it's really so that in those municipalities, the situation is that there is a group of people for whom change is a risk of losing a job, privileges, and they prefer to maintain the system existing rather than risking changes. So absolutely, I fully agree that 2 terms are necessary. But what to do to support development of rural areas? Firstly, I wanted to mention the program named LEADER, worth supporting and using funds from it. And the LEADER program, apart from its limitations, changed the situation in rural areas. Christopher, I remember in the first period when we were implementing the LEADER, one of representatives of local activity groups quoted a lady from his local village. We, for the first time, could do something on our own, and we got support to do this. So these initiatives do exist. We need public system of supporting such initiatives. That's one thing. Another, there are leaders who are natural leaders, but we need constant supporting of those who may become leaders. A lot good is done by foundation of supporting rural areas, but it is not enough. We should have a system to train leaders. Yes, such people who can take responsibility, give us a hint and give guidance and support social activities. So these are the elements which are very strongly needed by us. Let me add that time today is right in local governments to treat investment in human capital as investment being serious, because so far it was so that if the road was not built, a lamp post put there, and a football pit and bus stop, all money doesn't make sense to spend. Soft things are insignificant. It's time to talk about it and to change it towards integration, to following the example, to give time for village heads to go to another village, to actually watch the examples, because those groups were going to the west and looking at, yes, to the west of Poland, but very often we have exchange of opinions in Poland, which gives a lot of good, and really it changed a real lot to better. Let me add to what Madam Professor said, integration, but first of all, education and activation.
Za chwilkę będzie czas na pytania.
In a moment, there will be time for questions, but I promise after this round, there will be time for questions. In a moment, we will include you. Please let us end this round, and I think there is time for questions or reflections from the audience. Well, we heard change is a risk, and for this change, we need courage. And to have this courage, again, also from women's perspective, let me tell you about some action we took, and it is a great success. I'm very glad about it. So it is creating a system which will allow personal and professional development of people in those areas so that they are not afraid to take up risky decisions in their opinion, but not necessarily risky. As Agro-Woman Foundation, we did last year a mentoring program where we took mentors, various people, managers from large agri-food companies, but also leaders from agricultural organizations, and 16 women from all over Poland came. This program lasted for half a year, and in the mentorship, what happened there, we had a wrap-up in the conference, and really people shed tears on how great change was introduced, even in mentality. To have the courage to change something, and thus you also build leaders who show by their example in rural areas that various other choices can be made which will support to avoid people outflowing from rural areas, to diversify this also from the perspective of activities, but also to build various groups which will be integrating local communities. So apart from systemic solutions, apart from the leader mentioned here, which is fantastic, we need such initiatives which will allow us or such social groups like women in rural areas to feel their power. It's hard when we are talking of women leaders in rural areas. Agnieszka, how do you see your role as a leader? Because you are one. I'm not quite fully convinced that it is the case, but because I also do not have a lot of experience. I am in housewives circle for 3 years, so I don't have vast experience, but due to the fact that our circle of housewives was established to start acting, so that our little village, which did not have the power, it was just sleepy, not much was happening, to start living. And what Monika can see is the result of all those activities which we, as housewives circle, we introduced, and we have a lot of things to do, and it is a plan for a long term, let's say for 10 years ahead, but we are satisfied by what has happened so far, and that the village, after this COVID process and the fact that people were separated, starts living and starts creating the community anew. But back to the question, basic question, Monika, what to do? In my opinion, we have to start listening, and we should start cooperating, because we as housewife circle or organization, I will get to it if you allow me time. So we want to cooperate. We have a human potential, and we have whom to create various initiatives with, but we don't have money. And here we count upon the local government and also on other NGOs, which are a bit greater, and they have subsidies for creating a plan or creating activities which we need, because I notice a trend that it's the government who invents some solutions without consultancy with local communities, and they introduce sometimes solutions which we do not need at all. And in my opinion, at the very beginning, we should ask people what they need. And there are programs which allow this. that they make money available for local activities, which are, of course, supported by specific studies or tests in local communities, verification if the activities are needed and if the local community is going in the right direction. So, in my opinion, what we need is a conversation, a discussion, which we miss a bit in our societies and in actually understanding of bottom-up and top-down initiatives. And by all means, these elements appear, but in my opinion, there is too little of it, and not always they are addressed directly to local communities, and not always we need them. So, in order to conclude this part, of course, we will also refer to New Zealand, and then I will go with the microphone to the audience. So, how do you strengthen in New Zealand? How do you strengthen bottom-up activities in rural areas? And what are the key areas where, because you mentioned school, the role of school, which is significant, but how is it going on today? Which areas you are strengthening? Who is the main actor in these bottom-up activities?
That's a very good question, and how to answer it so everyone can understand. I think that what I've heard is not new, but I think in New Zealand we might be several years ahead of you in terms of where we are today compared to where we were maybe 5 or 10 years ago. I would make no differentiation between men and women in terms of leadership. In our community organisations, women are probably more represented in our town or village community organisations than what men are. We've had three female prime ministers. Half of our MPs are women. We have had a real change in, how do I say, our outlook is different now than what it was many years ago, and I think that the message from the bottom up also comes from the top down, and that it's just about having an inclusive mindset, and that someone talked about leadership, and leadership is about courage, and it's about not being afraid of making a mistake. It's not being afraid of asking for help. And more importantly, leadership to me is just about being involved, and anyone can be involved. So that's probably my answer, and simply is that in New Zealand, everyone is involved. Maybe without understanding the Polish context anymore, I would think probably a little bit more involved than what it is here, but only by a few years.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I must say one more thing. Yes, of course, bottom-up is very important, but the question is that we do not have funds for it in Poland. They must be obtaining, the organizations must do really great gymnastics, because in the second pillar there are no funds for it. In Cohesion Fund, the money is not for this because it is not the right fund. So there is a very big problem, even if we want, local development, super initiative, smart village, extension of digital villages. It is a great initiative also, but for all that, funds are needed so that those people learn to apply for them and want to utilize them. Without funds, you can paint the fence. Well, a comment also that we need really combining public capital with private capital, and that is an entering program which we ran. It can be funded by business within ESG or the social character. Vast funds allocated for the housewife circle for the agency are insufficient, and simply you cannot cannot make a good investment with the need if money is not available. So combination of the capital would be a good solution. Well, Andrzej, and then
Proszę Państwa,
ladies and gentlemen,
Pani Profesor Stanny
Madam President Stanny presented statistically how many farmers we have or people related to farming in a village. What is the situation? Development of rural areas is funded from the second pillar of common agricultural policy, managed by people who perceive agriculture, first of all, and non-agricultural aspect of the village they cannot notice, and various political pressure makes them not see it. We need a different approach to supporting development. I was saying that the traditional village does not exist. I am for establishing a European fund to support local development so that we do not need to think whether it is rural or not, but to support initiatives, local initiatives, bottom-up initiatives, and such support is what we do need. And we have to keep in mind to have a rural area to be developing, we must have access to services, not only for development, but to avoid actually shrinking. We have to have access to public services and also commercial services. Yes, but first of all, public services of the state should provide village dwellers with access to public services, yes. And Mr. Hamish.
And just one thing, bottom up. In New Zealand, we used to have very much the control of the public services were from the municipality, if that's the right word, the big town. And it directed the funds to the little village. And then the little village formed a committee or a group and convinced the municipality that it was capable of not looking after all of its services, but some of it, that the community could decide when it was going to paint its fence and what colour. And over time, the community board, as we call them now, the community board has some responsibility and certainly some representation to the municipality on where the money is spent, and it does so on behalf of its village. So it's not the municipality that's making all of the decisions. Some of the social things now the power has been given to the village. But it's only through leadership and courage and people sticking their heads up that happens. If no one takes the step, it doesn't happen.
To znów o roli liderów. Idę z mikrofonem, oczywiście, ale pan...
Well, of course, I'm going with the microphone, but the gentleman was first. Forgive me, I will be coming in turn. Good afternoon, once again. I noticed, well, everything is visible in the statistic, Madam said. We have actually villages statistics, everything fulfills from politics to education. I wanted to go back to Galicia. I'm from here, and here we have for generations people of two professions. Farms were always very small, but we always had pressure on education. We have top results in education in Poland. So 8th grade graduates, and yes, it is a pressure. Nobody will survive based on the small farms. So there are two professional people. I go to my colleague who is headmistress of school, and yes, there is a party for half a village, but local community keep together. People live longest in Poland here. Well, if you go from Krakow, you will see there is the gap of length of life just along the borderline. But a question, many people want to ask questions. I know, but you were not talking about it, so let me mention. And therefore, I wanted to mention that 4,000 inhabitants village will not survive on a village. They would have to plant marijuana to survive on it. So we have other production roles in people of two professions, and for us those villages are rich and people pay income tax, and there is more money coming from this than from agriculture. So those villages have full infrastructure, they have music school and cultural centers. We have to aim at this, because only here in Poland, when people emigrate, street, they return back to their village. Well, it's a question of density of inhabitation, but if they wanted, they would leave and go to towns, but they stayed in the village. So it's not a question, it's a statement. You were number 2, so I will walk to here. Ladies and gentlemen, this quorum which is here, I think we need to introduce some joke here and some laughter. So let me address first the beautiful ladies. We were talking of village heads. So I suggest village heads, female village heads, to take off their pants. There will be more females. Well, we went back. Village gave to. I'm adult. I have children of your age. I am over 80. I have 4 children. I have a family. And what most of our society have? They have a house and a gate. We didn't have a gate in the past. We had links. Yes, we may long for it, but when women take off pants and put on skirts, it will return. Today we must see it differently. We live in different circumstances. If somebody has a question, I do encourage you to ask questions, but questions, please. I have a question addressing you because it may not be the main stream of your inputs to the topic, but nevertheless, as you noticed, the village is becoming less and less agricultural. We heard that about 20% farmers are there, so a minority. Inhabitants, well, 20 years ago, there were 50-odd%. Now there are 20-odd% farmers, so clear minority. And I have a question to you. How do you see, because of course, what is most important is activating people who live in the village, but I know there are more and more problems with people, inhabitants of big cities who come to the village. You are an example, but not only you. Come and stay. So is it a kind of a threat, or those who return are not those who want to push out local inhabitants, because they come from this village again. 20 years ago, most people lived in the village, and now I'm going to the question. So now those people return to the village and start forming the village. And I think it is also important to set up a relationship properly in the village with the current situation, with less and less farmers and more inflowing people from town who start shaping the village to a greater and greater extent. I will take this question very personally, because when I became village head in 2023, main task for me was integration. These problems do appear, but let me tell you once again, not those people return who came out from the village, but their children and grandchildren. So these are completely different people. In most cases, they are educated people, but it is in most cases significant, but it causes a lot of problems, demand and the will to grout the village in concrete, and secondly, not noticing the character of village. So far, we moved to the village, and all of a sudden, barking dogs and roosters singing in the morning. Well, what is the answer? To sit down together, be together and talk, and break the barriers and so on. So people have claims if they are strangers, but if we sit together, we are together. It is a way to solve problems. Apart from what Grażyna said, there is also one important element. We need better space management. Great residential quarters are built in villages and there is no common public space. The dogs you mentioned are let free to beetroots. When three big dogs chase one another, the beetroots disappear. So it is happening. So better space management, and I do appeal to everybody who have influence. Be careful about removing agricultural activities. Well, in Poland we have construction land plots for construction for the nearest 20-30 years. So Andrzej was talking of the village from 20-30 years ago where community was naturally being built. For example, through common working together, this will not return. But it is not true that in the village we do not have this capital. This capital exists in the village, which can be utilized. But first of all, we have to strengthen it. And strengthen it was not clearly uttered here. You can do a lot of good, not only through money, but through legal changes. And when we were introducing the village head fund in 2014, it was not addition, because I would argue what played a greater role, the village head or the fund, but both activities are systemic activities. Systemic support for the village to be able to solve its problems by itself. Time is flying forwards, reality is changing, and we have to constantly think of changes which could help the village heads or all inhabitants of the village. And today we need a lot of legal changes, because it is not so. There are villages which are passive, which are active, and those in which vast potential is sleeping, but it cannot be developed because the law is actually choking it. We actually raise such proposals for changes. We hope it will be an element which will solve some of the problems uttered here. The village will not get a legal entity, but they may get a fractional one if having this legal entity, if they have access to own a bank account, and on this bank account today it is legally impossible. They will be able to gather funds in various ways. For example, you can imagine today, seemingly possible, but it does not exist, passing over municipal assets and taking benefits, collections and so on. So working out funds by themselves, they will be much more active, and in a greater extent they will influence those needed changes. And money will be always necessary, and may it be in largest amounts at this bank account. Thank you very much. And
Dla rządu. I potem do pani.
Pani professor,
well, Madam Professor, here in Polish statistics, where I was once, it was 38.1% people living in villages. Now it is 42%. No, no, no. It is still 40 and... Please let me finish. It is the same number. No, more. 15 million all the time, since 1947. Please allow me. It is not a lecture. Sorry, madam. So, the village died out. Old village, Mr. Minister Hałasiewicz, died out in their activities. And the first question, must it be forced activity by cash or something? How to maintain it or revive it? Yes, but now a question, if one animator or leader, whatever we call them, will revive it and return the happy Polish village. Well, you are from Gołcza, I am from Wolbron, so Małopolskie region. It is very difficult, but what you should do, what is happening now, law about production space and management, to hell you kicked out the stipulation which was priority of entrepreneurship in rural areas. If we do not introduce it, so then I will kick out Minister Siekierski. This is a stimulus to avoid making economic zones in Tarnów, Krakow, and you were all pushing towards more expensive. No, they must have relief in a barn and in various buildings they have from grandfathers. If you don't introduce it in priority of entrepreneurship, so at least the word sustainable village, from what perspective? It is hard to get and offer a Nobel Prize. What incentives to keep young generation to stay in a village? How to force lazy teachers to avoid 50% children having additional lessons, private lessons, so they don't teach children and schools are liquidated. So it's very, very difficult. Everybody, yes, in management, in ruling units of local management. Well, you mentioned routine. After 20 years, you are a routine person, but it is very difficult a problem at ministry. It had to be actually rolled over, Madam Professor. How to stop this degradation of tradition, culture of our Polish village? And thank you very much for understanding by peace, let it be my projects which could not break through those events of 1-2 days with using the teaching schools, churches and the fire brigade halls. No. These are very important things, but nobody is talking about it. If I may say, ladies and gentlemen, it is not so that there is some degradation in place. What is happening, that certain areas are depopulated, that people are flowing out. These are areas in which actually, apart from agricultural function, nothing was built. Yes, I agree, entrepreneurship should be there, but if there was no local leader, if we were not supporting them because it did not exist, so by force we will not create them there. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you the thing, maybe unpopular here, but from Jasionka we will start talking about it. We have to think over how to cleverly close down the areas where unfortunately costs of living are very, very high. How to deliver basic services to the population present there and to develop them where development chances are clearly greater. By force we will not break through certain processes. We have to accept them and to learn to mitigate them. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, I know that there are loads of questions and reflections, but we have to be finishing because we are far behind time. I encourage you to discuss in the foyer. I'm sure people... thank you very much. Please be invited to discussions in... so we will be...